Hi, I'm Beth, creator of Dry It, Can It. I'm not a professional, I'm a homemaker, but I like sharing what I do to preserve food with dehydrating, canning, and freeze drying. And today I want to talk about how to know when your food is dry, when you're freeze drying or when you're dehydrating. So I just took out of the freeze dryer some fruit. These were canned fruits, and I really wanted to kind of test and see, what I could do and what happens with this. Sometimes you can buy canned fruit on sale, and then it makes sense to buy it in bulk, but I really wanted to try and freeze dry some of it. So I've dehydrated pears and peaches and fruit cocktail in the past, and I've also dehydrated cherries in the past. And the process for both of those is different. But the focus today really is to talk about how do you know when your food is dry. So when you're dehydrating your food, you really need to do a couple of things. When you're dehydrating your food, you're working at a lower temperature and you're generally removing moisture, but there's usually anywhere, depending upon the food, anywhere from 12 to 30% of the moisture left. So what you need to do when you're dehydrating food, I have some carrots here that I dehydrated, is first of all, when you think your food is done, you want to take it out of the dryer, out of your dehydrator, I should say, and then you want it to get to room temperature. Now that should only take a couple of minutes, and on a hot, humid environment or on a humid day, you don't want to leave that out much longer. And then you want to check your food to see if it seems dry. Now some foods are going to be a little bit pliable. Apples are an example of that. Other foods like carrots should be really hard and crunchy. So depending upon your food, get it to room temperature before you check before it's done. After you take your dehydrated food out, you need to do a step called conditioning. Conditioning is making sure that your food is adequately dry for storage. And I'm just finishing conditioning of these dehydrated carrots. So how do you condition? What you want to do is you want to put your food in a moisture-proof container. A jar is a good option, providing it has some kind of a seal. So this is an old spaghetti jar. And if you look, you can kind of see the ring in here. That's sort of a rubbery ring. That will make sure that your food is adequately kept from moisture. Another option is to use a canning jar with a lid, because of course those have the rubber gaskets on it. When I'm conditioning my food, I want to leave it in the jar for 4 to 7 days, and I want to turn it daily or shake it daily and just make sure that it stays loose. Make sure that there's no signs of moisture, make sure there's no condensation on the container. Now, some people will put things in a plastic bag for conditioning. That really isn't adequate because plastic is not impervious to moisture. Think about if you have something in the freezer, let's say like a meat of some sort, and you take it out and you put it on the plastic bag and you let it thaw. 9 times out of 10, the juice from that meat is going to come outside of the bag, leak onto your refrigerator, leak onto your plate. That's a way of showing you that this is not moisture proof. I sometimes will put them in like a Tupperware container, and at this time of the year for me, where it's winter and it's fairly dry, I can get by with that, but it's not really a moisture proof option, especially in the summer. Now when you're working with powders, this happens to be some tomato powder, you want to turn it upside down, and while this is fairly loose, sometimes with your powders they're going to stick to the top. A lot of times with powder, that's just compaction. So you just want to give it one tap, and if that powder falls down, it's compaction and not moisture. But powders especially, you want to make sure that they're dry, you want to spin them and make sure that you don't have any clumps. So that's really what conditioning is for dehydrated foods. Now, let's talk about checking your food when you have freeze drying. Freeze drying is a different animal, because freeze drying actually removes almost all of the moisture. Generally, you're going to have from maybe 3 to 7% moisture left, so your food is going to be much drier. A lot of people will say, okay, I can feel my tray and I know my food is dry, and I say that's not really the case at all. With freeze drying, there's a couple of things you want to check for. First of all, you should feel the food, and the food should all feel warm. I know when I checked this last night, it felt like it was crunchy, but the food had cold spots, and that's telling you that the food is still frozen inside and it's not completely dry. The bigger thing and the more accurate thing though is to use a scale. Let me show you what I use. All right, any kind of a scale, an inexpensive scale works fine for measuring your food. The kicker is that it really needs to be something that measures in grams. Why grams? Because there are about 28 grams in 1 ounce of food. And if you weigh this food and you don't get any variance in temperature, you want to check a basic, or in weight I should say, you're going to check your food, you're going to weigh it 2 or 3 hours, you're going to put it in the freeze dryer, you're going to check it again in 2 or 3 hours, and you're going to see if the weight has changed. When you're using ounces, your weight may not have changed and you may think it's dry, but when you're using grams and it's 28 grams per ounce, you can see if you're still losing moisture. So always when you're freeze drying, check your trays with a scale, and a scale that measures in grams. Now, is that 100% foolproof? No, it's not. Now, let me talk about what I experienced. Now, for starters, when you have freeze-dried food, it is really hygroscopic. What does that mean? That means it's going to pick up moisture really, really fast. So you want to get your food into some kind of a container fairly quickly. Now, even though I just told you a plastic bag is not good for conditioning, a plastic bag is good for holding your food temporarily until you bag it. And basically what I'm doing is I'm putting my food in here simply because I'm going to bag it after I'm done with this video, and I don't want to hold it up. I also don't want my food to absorb moisture. If this was summer and it was humid in here, I'd have worked really quickly and I'd have bagged this in a Mylar bag, or I would have put it all in individual jars or something like that. So, assuming I can get my bag sealed here, this is going to be good for a couple hours, no problem. You'll notice that I am wearing gloves. Why am I doing that? I can't say that I do that 100%, to be honest with you, but your hands have moisture, they have oils on them, and you can introduce those back into your food if you're not wearing gloves. In other words, if you're using your hands, particularly if your hands are maybe sweaty, or if you just washed your hands. The other way that you want to check your food when you're dehydrating, or excuse me, whether you're freeze drying, is to make sure that it's really dry. So I have, for example, a piece of a peach here, and if I squeeze this, it really is powder. I weighed this tray, and here's what's interesting, and here's where checking your food is really important. I weighed this particular tray 3 times using a scale with grams and got the same weight. So in theory, my food should be dry, but I always want to check it. And here's what's really interesting, is these were canned cherries, no sugar added. And when I checked these were still gummy. These were still wet inside, and that's a concern. And therefore, some foods may have the weight maximized, but cherries have a skin on them. Because they were pitted, I assumed that they would be sufficiently, have a hole in them so that the moisture can escape. But the reality is, if I try and squeeze these, they're really hard, and I can't pull them apart. And the reason for that is, though it's crunchy and tasty and hard, I don't know if you're gonna be able to see this, there's still moisture inside of these. So some things like grapes, blueberries, cherries, which have a skin on them, actually take quite a bit longer in your freeze dryer. Now, if I put these in the freeze dryer longer, I can get them to be dry, but because I was just testing these, I don't want to run my freeze dryer longer than I need to. I'm going to put these in a container, and I'm going to be right back. All right, so I have these in a container, the cherries temporarily. I checked one more, and it definitely was still chewy in the inside, so I know that these still have moisture. They're a lot better than they were 3 hours ago, and if I run them longer, because they do have a hole in them, they will get dry. So the question naturally is, when you have freeze-dried food, do you need to condition it? And the answer to that is no, as long as you've done 2 things. You've checked by weight to make sure that your tray has not lost more weight over 2 or 3 hour period, and you've also felt it to make sure that it's warm. I like to feel the underside of my trays to start, make sure that there's no cold spots there, and then the top of the food with a gloved hand to make sure that there are no cold spots. The cherries today that the tray weighed fine 3 times was the first time really that I had a situation where my food wasn't completely dry. But that's where it's really important that you check your food. Check food, check your biggest pieces of meat or candy even, or fruit or whatever it is, and pull from the center as much as you can, because logically that's going to be where it's going to take the longest for your food to dry. So in summary, what you want to do is for your dehydrated food, you don't need to really weigh your trays, because the longer you keep it in, they're always going to kind of lose, because you're not going to get that much moisture. Let your food get to room temperature, then check it for pliability, depending upon the food, or for crunchiness. But again, make sure it's at room temperature. Put it in a moisture-proof jar, condition for 4 to 7 days, then you can put it in long-term storage. With your freeze-dried food, you want to make sure that your food is warm. You want to make sure that it is you're not losing more weight on the trays of food. And then you don't need to condition it, but you do need to put it in moisture-proof containers. The best way to store your food is this. If you want to use some kind of a jar or some kind of a moisture-proof container with a good seal for short-term use for dehydrated foods or freeze-dried foods, if you're going to consume it in 6 months to a year, I think you're good to go. If you're going to store something long-term for your freeze-dried food, dehydrated foods will store, depending upon what it is, anywhere from 6 months to maybe 2 years. If you're going to store long-term on freeze-dried food, you want to put your food in a Mylar bag, because you want to protect it from moisture, from oxygen, and from light. And you're going to put in an oxygen absorber that will take care of the rest of the oxygen to make sure that your food holds long-term. So I hope I gave you some insight on how to check if your food is done, whether you're dehydrating or whether you're freeze-drying. Thumbs up if you learned anything in this video. If you want to subscribe to my channel, there's a subscribe button in the lower right-hand corner. I would appreciate that. Thanks for watching.